Tell me about a time opposing views ended up having a positive result. Some form or wording of this question has been coming up in late 2021 and throughout 2022 in Google's Googliness and Leadership interview. And because these interviews tend to lean behavioral, I really wanted to focus in on a behavioral question. I thought this one would be a good one to tackle. Now, why does Google ask this question? At its core, this is really a question of inclusivity. Specifically, do you see validity in others' opinions, ideas, etc.? And can you provide an example of a time when you've been able to bring these views together to essentially build an even better result? So let's dive right in. Item one, the STAR method. When answering behavioral questions, we are going to focus in on using the STAR method. I know that we have talked about this extensively, and the likelihood that you know these steps is very high. So let's go really high level. I just want to focus in on a few key areas in each section to help you have success. In the situation and task, we're thinking about 30 seconds, and you're only trying to identify a few things. You want to establish credibility by stating your role in company. You want to provide 1 to 2 sentences that provide context that is detailed and generic at the same time. It's very hard to find that balance. And then provide the specific task if needed and definitely set that timeline. Next is actions. We're going to spend 2 to 3 minutes on this section, maybe slightly over 3 minutes if it's a really robust example. But how did you personally contribute to the success of the example that you're providing? In order to do that, you're going to have to spend at least 2/3 of your time in this section. So start to think about the larger actions. This is what I like to call the whats. What are the 3 to 5 whats we did to make this successful? And then chop down. Support each one of those whats with a minimum of 3 hows. How did you do that what? And what did we talk about? So let's follow it in chronological order. Typically, almost all examples will start with some form of data and research, and then conversations with the critical stakeholders to create a plan. Then we typically test and execute. This is the step that is most often missed. Oftentimes, we're really front-loading those first actions. Then lastly, what also is quite often missed is we really want to focus in on launching, presenting, documenting, socializing, all 4. That's usually our last action. Now the results. 3 items similar to the situation. We want to focus in on just 3 things. The first result answers the question. The second result starts to bring more numbers into the equation because numbers are really the universal language. And then the third is repeatability. You solved in this space, but what's the bigger win because of that? Always think about that bigger win. I always use that hand motion when I talk to my clients about it. Repeatability is a great way to end your answer. Okay, so let's restate the question and let's imagine that we're working with our trusty interviewer, Sue. So the question to restate again was, tell me about a time opposing views ended up having a positive result. Sue, this is an example from my time as a technical recruiter at Google in the Bay Area. I created a candidate experience training and partnered with my colleague Jane in the London office, who is focusing in on a similar initiative to create a cohesive global training for candidate experience. I really wanted to focus the training on current employees, while Jane was more interested in getting this training into our onboarding for recruiters just coming into Google. Let me tell you how Jane and I took our opposing views and over the next 12 months ended up coming up with a winning strategy for both audiences. The first action I needed to take, after having a few informal chats with Jane and really her establishing that she wanted this as part of the onboarding, we met. And in that video conversation, I went in with a really positive mindset and active listening approach. I asked a lot of questions to understand really why Jane was focusing in on onboarding, and then I brought data. I wanted to share the trending results of what were provided by the data analyst to show that we had a negative candidate experience trend over the last 4 quarters. Ultimately, the results were we didn't come to a decision in that meeting, but we agreed to meet on a weekly cadence. So the next action was we started meeting weekly, but we needed to make the team more robust. Jane added specifically a recruiter in London. I added a recruiter in the Bay Area, and we added somebody who is also local to the Bay from the training and development team. And in these initial meetings, we really focused in on mapping out the critical areas for success based on 4 areas that Jane and I had identified as the most important. Specifically, managing the candidates in GHire, which was our applicant tracking system, systemizing email inbox management, teaching them recruiters specifically, on how to manage their calendars for best candidate follow-ups, and lastly, really focusing in on better communication strategies. And we utilized some of my training and some of Jane's training to highlight these concepts. And the specific feedback that we got from the learning and development team was to focus in on fundamentals, and that these fundamentals really should be trained in onboarding. And I agreed to back up this approach. So as this team of 5, we spent the next 3 months really rebuilding, fine-tuning, and getting it to a beta model that we wanted to test. And we tested it. We wanted to test in London and test in the Bay so that we could target a small sample set. And we had Jane in London so she could train and have her recruiter shadow that training, and same in the Bay so I could train and have our recruiter shadow. And as part of this beta, we took 2 additional steps. We added a 10-question survey that was mandatory to get feedback, and we created a 3-month follow-up candidate experience learning session to learn more about how these best practices were being implemented 3 months after taking the training. And we continue to do this beta once a month in both markets for the next 3 months. So the next action was to roll it. We got really good feedback from the beta. We made tweaks over 3 months, and with the support of the recruiter community and especially leadership and learning and development, we finalized all the requirements from text to graphics, and we launched. And we launched it globally as a part of onboarding for all recruiters, and we continued to survey every single one and continued to make it mandatory. And we continue to meet on a weekly basis to tweak and improve our results. Now, in correlation, over those first 6 months, while this training had been released, we were also going in and doing those 3-month check-ins to see what was going on. And we noticed that some recruiters were really struggling with the workload and managing candidate experience. And Jane actually became the first person to advocate for creating a secondary training that would be given to more experienced recruiters, people who had been there for at least 3 months. So we continued to take this survey feedback, continued to take this training feedback, and we released a second course 6 months later on our Grow tool, which was an internal learning tool, so that experienced recruiters could have access to this refresher course. And with the support of leadership, we saw that about 65% of recruiters were retaking this survey within the first 6 months of employment at Google. And the results. So Jane and I created an excellent candidate experience in both onboarding and a follow-up course by collaborating and being nimble with each other. In my time at Google, 1,100 people took the onboarding class, and that 65%, 700 people took that follow-up course within 6 months. And the overall data showed a 20% increase in candidate satisfaction over the first calendar year of taking that training and implementing it into onboarding. But the biggest win, the biggest result, because we had so much success, then the interview training that was trained globally to all interviewers added a candidate experience model as well. I know this is a pretty robust answer that probably goes a little bit over the time conventions of what I've suggested. I think when I tested it, the situation was right around 30 seconds. The actions were a little over 3 minutes, and the results were a little over 30 seconds as well. And I don't think I mentioned that initially. Results should be around 30 seconds. But this is what a good answer should look like. We really dove into all the steps. We embedded numbers throughout, and I showed how I built really strong connectivity with Jane. I really hope this example helps. Thanks so much.